Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be talking about the third dynasty of Ur in our continuing study of the history of civilization. We talked about the Uric period, where in going from hunting and gathering, you have government organization in cities with trade throughout Mesopotamia. Copper is now beginning to be utilized. Then we had the early dynastic period, that's 3000 to about 2350 BC. Cuneiform is developing into syllabic writing. The Age of Gilgamesh, the Age of the King List. Following that, we have the Akkadian Empire with Sargon the Great, the rise of the city of Akkad. Semitic kings are ruling over Sumer. And then that all comes crashing down with the Gutian period, where these mountain people from the Zagros, the Guti, they invade and they destroy Akkad, and they are there for about 100 years, 2200 roughly to 2100 BC. And now we're going to find a new city that eventually rises up, the city of Ur. Not that the city is brand new, but it will now come to prominence in a way that it had not previously. It's located in the southern part of Mesopotamia, the southern part of Sumer even, just south of the Euphrates River. So the third dynasty of Ur, we call it that because there had been two earlier dynasties, but this is going to be the glory days of Ur, and I think possibly the glory days of Sumer as well. It begins with Ur-Namu, and we know something about him from a number of sources, but perhaps the most graphic is the stela of Ur-Namu. Notice this large stone, curved at the top. That's what makes it a stela, and it has sort of looks like a crescent moon for good reason, because it is honoring the moon god Nana. Now the stela has been broken apart. In fact, lots of the symbols on it and the engravings on it had broken off, and when people have tried to restore it, and they've done something of a good job. But notice one person seated and the other one standing before him, about halfway down over on the right. We're going to zoom in on that. As Ur-Namu, he's the one who's standing before Nannar, the moon god of Ur. So the one seated, remember the headdress looks a little bit like horns. That's the sign we said last time of a god, and this is the god Nannar, and Ur-Namu is standing before him. He's pouring water into a tree. He's watering the tree, a tree of blessing, a tree, can I say it even, a tree of life. Well, Ur-Namu had been an official under Utu-Hagel of Uruk, and it had been Utu-Hagel who had defeated the Guti and reclaimed the city of Uruk for his own. He sent Ur-Namu, one of his officials, to go and conduct canal inspections and oversee the various lands that are under the headship of the king. And we read that Utu-Hagel, his body was carried off by the river. Somehow he died. Can't help but wonder if Ur-Namu was conducting some canal bank modifications in the midst of that. Well, we don't want to accuse him of that, we don't really know. But Ur-Namu now becomes the new king, and he specifically becomes the king of Ur. Now he's going to come back and capture Uruk. He founds the third dynasty of Ur. He extends his rule over Uruk and over other cities in southern Mesopotamia, that is in Sumer as well. Ur-Namu drives the Guti from Sumer. They had, cities had gained their independence, but now he takes the fight to them. He declares himself to be king of Sumer and Akkad, and yet he continues, even though he's Sumerian, he continues to use Akkadian in the official writings of the court. The Akkadian language had sort of stuck now. It had become the official language, even though people were bilingual and multicultural. And he describes himself as the father of his people. He says, I'm the good king. I'm the liberating king. I came to set you free from those nasty old guti. And he engages in a number of building projects, the most famous of which is the ziggurat at Ur. Now, a ziggurat is a temple tower, not a pyramid. Pyramid is sort of pyramid shape, but this is step, but it's not like the step pyramid. This has stairways going up in the picture here on one side. Now, a ziggurat can have multiple stairways. There's actually the ziggurat at Ur has been restored, partially restored at least, so that you can go and see it. Even today, this picture was taken, I don't know who took it. It was sent to me by a chaplain, military chaplain, when the Americans were in Iraq a number of years ago. He's also, Ur-Namu is also known for his law code. One of the earliest law codes where we've heard of earlier ones, but we actually have a number of the laws that are written in this law code. It mandates the death penalty for murder and for robbery, but for other lesser crimes, when no one was put to death, instead it gives financial penalties. For example, it's not an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. It's money for an eye and money for a tooth. Or remember, they didn't have coins, so silver, gold, some sort of weighted possession. But there's a system of restitution that's made, where if you hurt somebody, then you give some sort of financial restitution for that person. It contains a semi-private administration of justice, in that there's no, you can't dial 911 and call a police officer to come and deal with things. So you're sort of having to get your friends and relatives to help administer that justice, and yet the king has authority to rule and to make judgments. There is a inequality before the law, where the law code divided people into three distinct classes. There were the aristocrats, there were the commoners, and finally there were the slaves. And you sort of got a different level of justice depending on where you were at, or depending upon who you were with whom you were dealing. The next king that we're going to see, the son of Ur-Namu, after Ur-Namu dies, and he dies fighting the Guti, is going to be Shulgi. And Shulgi begins by wreaking vengeance upon the Guti. They are driven completely out of Mesopotamia, and he clears the land of them. He also goes on to conquer Elam. Now remember how we mentioned that Elam at a later date is going to come back and sort of have their day in court, but right now they are conquered by the Sumerians. He now builds and it had already been started by his father, but he builds an extensive bureaucracy where it seems like, I don't think this is really true, but it seemed like just about everybody was working for the government. Everybody's both working for and paid by, and their lives are ruled extensively by the government, that tells them how much they are going to make. Now, when I say how much, remember they're not actually getting money. They're getting so much food, a certain amount of food, and then if you're a woman, you get about half that amount, and if you're a woman with child, you also get half that amount. So children, they're just going to get the leftovers, and it's very controlling. We would find it so, and yet he's describing this as a necessity in order to make sure that people are fed. He builds roads and rest houses along those roads. We might think of that as the equivalent of the first Holiday Inn or motel which he's building. He declares himself to be a god. It reminds us of those who came earlier, who had made such declarations. And he writes a praise poem where he appears to be the author. He actually writes in the first person this praise poem to himself, to Shulgi. So the praise song of Shulgi, it starts off, I am a king. offspring begotten by a king and born by a queen. I, Shulgi the noble, have been blessed with a favorable destiny right from the womb. Not going to read you the whole poem. Later section says, I'm Shulgi, god of manliness, the foremost of the troops. When I stretch the bowstring on the bow, when I fit a perfect arrow to it, I shoot the bow's arrow with the full strength of my arms. And he talks about what a great military commander is, what a great writer he is, what a great musician he is, what a great runner he is. It seems like there was nothing that Shulgi could not do, at least according to his own opinion. Later on in the poem he says, I bestow joy and gladness, and I pass my days in pomp and splendor, but people should consider for themselves. It is a matter to keep in one's sights that at the inescapable end of life, no one will be spared the bitter gall of the land of oppression. And you think, my goodness, there seems to be maybe an air of humility. And just when you think that's going to be, he ruins it all by saying, but I am the one who's powerful enough to trust in his own power. Oh well. And yet there's some lines there that remind me just a bit of the book of Ecclesiastes, another king who writes about the emptiness of this life, and yet he doesn't seem to have learned the lesson that other king learned. And of course I'm talking about Solomon, who would be more than 1,000 years later. The third dynasty of Ur comes to a close after a mere 100 years, as a group from the north, a Semitic group known as the Amaru, we know them in the Bible as the Amorites, and also the Elamites from the east. They both sort of converge on the city of Ur and on this kingdom of Ur, this third dynasty, and they bring it to a shattering close. It is commemorated. Fall of Ur is commemorated in a lament for the city of Ur, a prayer of lament for the city. The prayer is supposedly uttered by the goddess Ningal as she weeps for the city. She prays to the other gods, and no help is forthcoming, and she describes a storm of destruction as it falls upon the city. The lament goes, for the gods have abandoned us. Like migrating birds they have gone. Ur is destroyed. Bitter is its lament. The country's blood now fills its holes like hot bronze in a mold. A bit later it says, even if I, bird-like, had stretched my wings and flown to my city, yet my city would have been destroyed on its foundation, yet Ur would have perished where it lay. There was something just inevitable about the fall of the city. He says, in all the streets and roadways bodies lay. In open fields that used to fill with dancers, the people lay in heaps. Great destruction, and great is the fall of the city of Ur. Now it's around the time of the fall of Ur that we read in the Bible that God comes to a man named Abraham and says, I want you to leave your city and your land and your people, and I want you to go to another land that I'm going to show you. And that begins a new chapter, yes, in the Bible, but a new chapter in history.